Hello everyone. Welcome to another exciting YLab webinar. I'm Ernie, an Innovation Manager at this Product Innovation Lab housed in National Gallery, Singapore. Thanks so much for joining us today. Let us know in the chat where you are calling in from in the world so we know which places will likely be the first to jump on board the Metaverse. We're hosting this Metaverse webinar on the next step in the co-evolution of art and technology from Singapore. A group of speakers gathered virtually today are forerunners in building and thinking about the Metaverse, often juggling both at once. Beyond the hype, we hope to have a conversation about where a co-evolution of humans and technology is headed. So your thoughts and opinions are welcome. Please feel free to react, shout out, or pop your questions in our YouTube chat or Discord throughout the webinar so we know how we are doing and what questions you have about the Metaverse. As an innovation arm dedicated to bring diverse stakeholders together to converse and collaborate around the latest technologies, YLab is pleased to be joined by an esteemed panel of speakers today, consisting of Dr. Loretta, author, professor, and CEO of Smobler Studios, who will be sharing about diversity and inclusion in the Metaverse. Duncan, curator from Singapore Art Museum, will touch on artistic adventures. Through their first-hand experiences, they will help shed some light on the promises, pitfalls, and possibilities of placemaking when it comes to the Metaverse. As this is such a vast topic that is constantly evolving, the speakers will also have a group chat at the end, moderated by Shengen, new media artist, HCI scientist and engineer, and our moderator for the day. As always, we invite you to comment, react, and post your questions throughout so we can note them for the panel later. Without further ado, I shall hand my time over to Shengen, who will further set the context and introduce our first speaker for the event. Shengen, please.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the YLab Metaverse webinar titled Next Step in the Co-Evolution of Humans and Technology. So, my name is Shengen. I'm part of the National Gallery Singapore. I'm running new media engagement department for museum planning and audience engagement. So, about the metaverse. It seems like everyone's talking about the metaverse, yet what it is and why are we even trying to build it? The hype around the metaverse promise that it will be the very next step in the co-evolution of humans and technology as we finally escape our physical form and unleash ourselves into a shared digital reality. Will be a place or places where we can explore new forms of governance and communication, finding new ways to work, live, play, and express our individualities, with the metaverse as a hive mind of multiple virtual realities that will usher in the next age of the shared immersive experience. This webinar brings together some of the region's metaverse mavericks who are building the businesses and cultural discourse to open up conversations about the way that we are imagining and building this emergent era of human consciousness. First, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Loretta Chen. She's a professor as well as an award-winning director who has directed numerous theoretical productions, such as like the F Word in 2011 at Edinburgh, sorry, Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which sort of get her the Amnesty Freedom of Expression Award for bringing the plight of sex trafficked women to light. She's also an author with some of the best-selling books such as Women on Top, The Art of Smashing Stereotypes and Breaking All Rules, The Elim Chu Story, Driven by Purpose, Destined for Change, Madonnas and Mavericks, Power Women in Singapore, where she interviewed 17 of Singapore's most illustrious women, including our current president. She is also the CEO of Smobler Studios, a metaverse architecture and Web3 design agency headquartered in Singapore with offices in Canada, USA, and Bhutan. So, without further ado, Loretta.
Hey, hey everybody. Can you all hear me okay? All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. It's global metaverse time. For full disclosure, I am in Hawaii, so it is literally like 1 a.m. for me. So if I'm completely incoherent, you can completely understand why. So, hey everybody, I'm going to stick to my 10 minutes, but I wanted to say a big thank you, Shengen, our moderators, Ernie, and of course, my co speaker later. So, thank you for that great introduction. So, I'll just quickly jump and share a little bit more about what Smobler is about and what are we doing, right? Building this metaverse. So, basically, Smobler Studios is a metaverse architecture and Web3 agency. And if you ask what that means, well, we are still figuring out, and we're all building this together. Suffice to say, I guess what qualifies us to be seated here to sharing our experience is that we are currently one of the leading metaverse architecture firms in that we are actively building in the sandbox as well as other metaverses. But right now, I think a lot of our focus in the sandbox because it is the leading metaverse. So our topic of discussion is really diversity and inclusion. And just looking at my team itself, we are wholly diverse. I mean, it's women-led, minority-owned. Our team is very global. If you ask us where does diversity start, it really starts with having a makeup of just truly international folk, right? I mean, talk about global metaverse time. Our team is everywhere from Brazil, Japan, Vietnam, UK, Bhutan, Singapore, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and it really brings together great talents from all over, right? I think one of the great things about working in the metaverse is that it truly transcends borders, and our creativity really is allowed to just it's completely transnational, right? And this world that we're trying to create is bigger than the sum of our parts. So I think that's why we're all so excited to be seated here and co-creating in the metaverse. And of course, as most of you probably already know, there is a big opportunity in the metaverse, right? It is no a surprise that obviously Facebook has changed its name to Meta. And since then, in October 2021, Smobler Studios has really like boomed. Previously, a lot of our work was really working with, digital natives, NFT projects. But since October 2021, we now have a lot of Web2 brands, legacy brands, government institutions that really want to come on board the metaverse, right? So basically, just to give you in a nutshell, in the next 5 minutes, the diverse projects that we undertake. We are now currently building out a few really distinctive projects, including the world's first concert venue. And again, this idea really came about during the pandemic because most people were shut in. And we started thinking, well, how do we create an arena that is going to be 24/7, open 24/7, and completely inclusive? How do we allow people from all over the world together and still celebrate, right, in this space? So this led to us creating Tools of Rock. I'll share a little video later on. But we also really thought about how to bring communities together. And top of mind was how do we bring the able-bodied and disabled together? I spent a lot of time thinking about that. My mother is in a wheelchair. She has dementia. I have an autoimmune disease. And so I'm frequently in a wheelchair. I just had surgery on Tuesday, actually. I think a lot about if there is one thing that I hope the metaverse to be able to do is to be able to bring communities closer. I mean, what is the use of technology if it separates us, right? So we actually set out to design the world's first accessibility park, and we are now working with a few bodies. SG Enable is one of them. We're also working in discussions with Carnegie Mellon to see how we can pool resources together to create the world's first accessibility park. And one of the ideas is to allow disabled artists to have a platform. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind is like how many Stevie Wonders are there, right? So we want to be able to create a more egalitarian platform for everyone to be able to come and play. We also launched the first, or ASEAN's first educational institution. I'll share with you a little bit more about that later on. And we also launched the food bank into the metaverse. So the food bank really feeds the food insecure, and we're really excited to have placed them on the metaverse map. And we also have our own IP, and that's called Cobbleland. And I'll share with you a little bit more about that. But why Tools of Rock? Like I said, Tools of Rock really stem from our idea to try and bring festivity, inclusion, right? Especially when we're all locked down. And it's currently actually in it's playing right now. You can, for those of you who are Sandbox fans, you can actually get onto Alpha Season. Our experience will launch September 24th. So look out for that. But for now, I'll just like to give you a sneak preview on what you can see in Tools of Rock. So take it away. Okay, so remember to catch us. September 24th will be an Alpha Season Hub in the Sandbox. The other thing that we are also really big on when we're co-creating the metaverse is this notion of like really humanizing the metaverse, right? I think it's no surprise, or it's no secret to many, that I'm actually like the most low-tech person. I don't even know how I ended up being a CEO of a metaverse architecture firm. I think it's just a stroke of good luck and just how things are. But really, I think one of the core things that we truly believe in is that if I had to bet my last dollar on anything, I always bet it on human capital, right? On our abilities to create. Just us around the room. I mean, just our creative abilities are just amazing. The fact that we now have this platform to bring all our creativity together in a way that was not possible before. So what we like to say is that we really humanize the metaverse. And so when we set out to create our version of the metaverse, I don't know about many of you, but I'm just going to confess, I don't own a mall in real life. Maybe Duncan does, maybe Shengen does, but I don't own a mall in real life. And so I thought, hey, if I'm going to build something in the metaverse, I'm going to create a virtual real estate where folks that typically can't afford, to participate in a brick and mortar store, to, set up a shop in Paragon or, Ion, to be able to own a piece of something in a virtual metaverse. So that's what we set out to do when we created Cobbleland, which is a multi-experience social hub. And our whole idea was to bring BIPOC, LGBTQIA, first-time entrepreneurs, momtrepreneurs, solo entrepreneurs that, like I said, typically can't afford to participate in real-world economies because they're priced out in really expensive real estate in Singapore and around the world, and to give them a slice of like virtual real estate and kind of handhold them into the metaverse, right? So that was the idea of Cobbleland, and we'd like to give you a little sneak preview. If you decide that you want to set up a shop in Cobbleland, this is what it potentially looks like. So we'll have the video play. Again, if you want to... So we already have more brands, NGOs join us on board Cobbleland. So hey, hey, you decide to rent a piece of your own real estate, just hit us up at Smobler Studios, right? And you're not going to be the only one. Like I said, we've already onboarded the food bank, and one of the things that we set out to do was to very intentionally create these NFTs and create like a campaign to really be very inclusive, to include Singaporeans, first-time crypto philanthropists. They don't know how to set up a wallet, don't know what an NFT is, and so we create a whole series of campaigns from like creating NFTs with very specific real world utility to make people understand the link between the digital and the physical. So like what we call the phygital sort of space that we're trying to create. So we also created, scaffolding for folks to be able to know how to set up your MetaMask wallet, how you purchase that first NFT, right? So a lot of hand holding and thought process when we design our entire campaign. So I think that's also part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion sort of ethos, right? To make it as accessible as possible. And this is the next slide that's coming up is, like I told you, one of the blueprints for what we're trying to do with an accessibility park. I always think that children can't be what they can't see. So when we wanted to create the accessibility park, we wanted a world without barriers, right? So we really challenge our architects to think about how do we design a space that is visually enticing, but yet removes all the barriers. I mean, I think about when I was younger and at a playground, and I noticed that I didn't see any disabled children playing. But in hindsight, it's because, the playground was probably, it was made of hard concrete, and there were all these stairs and steps. And, in hindsight now, at my grand old age, pushing 50, I'm kind of thinking that was just so divisive, right? It disallowed me from playing with kids who weren't as mobile, right? And so we wanted to create a world that removes all these barriers. So hopefully we'll see a new generation of children who are playing games in the metaverse and immersed in this world and saying, hey, this world doesn't reflect the real world I'm in, right? So when I grow up, I want to be able to create these spaces that are barrier free so that my friends can join me. So I truly think that once we start educating our young people early, we get a little bit more immersive, we build our social consciousness earlier, I think we can rid ourselves of a lot of the ills that we have. If you look at a lot of the spaces that are designed today, we're trying to retrofit or trying to now make it accessible, and sometimes it's a lot costlier. And so we're trying to also create the narrative much earlier with a lot of digital natives and younger people, right? The alpha generation that's coming up, hoping that they will begin to see a world without barriers. And as they grow up, begin to also recreate spaces that don't have barriers. And final two projects I really want to share about is about the creation of ASEAN's first Metaverse university. It is called Aventis. And we're really excited to launch a $1 million scholarship fund with Aventis in September. And basically, what happens is that we'll get corporate donors, corporations to actually purchase these NFTs and tokens, and so they can sponsor ASEAN students, right? Because we know that it's a 60 million population in ASEAN that qualify for executive education, but they're either priced out or just geographically impossible for them to take on graduate education, right? So we're hoping that through the tokenization, through our NFTs, and through the Aventis Metaverse, we can be able to reach out to a lot more demographics that, like I said, I previously priced out, right? I wonder if I have time to show this little video. So let me just try and play it from my side and see if you can take a look at it here. So basically what you're about to see in the video is a combination of different metaverses, right? So there's a hyperreal metaverse, there's also Sandbox, and also Decentraland, right? So Aventis really wants to be able to reach out to all different metaverses. So I think we're ready to play the video. So here goes. Okay. And just finally, I mean, this is something that we're really proud of at Smobler Studios, our metaverse for good, right? We truly believe that we can do good and do well together. And at the core of who we are at Smobler Studios is really our belief in our ideals, which stands for inclusion, diversity, equity, access, leadership, and love, as well as sustainability. I mean, this really is at the core of us. I mean, you can see it in our organizational chart. It really is. It's right front and center of who we are. Right, we don't live in one of those like pyramid charts where the CEO is right at the top, but we really think that what really guides us is our core values, our ideals, and that's how we think about our metaverse architecture outfit. And so one of the things we've set out to do, and we've actually been very unabashed about it and telling the press and sharing the public, that we truly believe that now that we have this opportunity to co-create the space, we really want us to be able to come together and co-create a metaverse for good. So what this means is we actually partnered with a family office called Octava. I think you're probably the first to hear about this because you're about to announce it soon. But we have partnered with Octava Family Office, and what Octava has done is to make us the custodians of their land, and so we are able to offer land to NGOs, brands, and services that want to do good, right? And basically, you can come on to our metaverse for good. You don't have to pay rent, you don't have to buy land, and all you have to do is really to pledge to do good, right? So if you're a school, if you're a charity, if you are some kind of cause, looking out for pets or young people, championing education, come onto Metaverse for Good, because we truly believe that this is a space where we can all come together borderless and be able to create something bigger than ourselves. So yeah, that's it really. I think if anything, my ending remarks would be don't be afraid of the metaverse. I think there are lots of people that are very cynical, very wary. And it's true, there are a lot of rug pull projects. There are people that are real speculators. But I think in this bear market, what we're really seeing is that we're seeing a lot of builders really sticking in for the long haul. I think there's nothing to fear except fear itself. It sounds cliche, but it's true. But I urge all of you to jump in. I think, think about the evolution of just say telecommunications, right? We used to use like an analog phone, and then we went on to like a flip phone, to now where everyone is just literally living by their cell phones, right? We use it as like a little mini computer. So the fact is, evolution is always happening, and it doesn't hit you overnight, but it's just really gradual. So I will say for most of you, just jump in, lean in, and really just co-create a metaverse for good, because I really think that we can be greater than the sum of our parts if we all decide to jump in early, and co-create together. So I'm just going to end there and head it over to our moderator. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Loretta. That was amazing presentation you just gave. I think it's quite interesting, like the amount of stuff you're doing. That's targeting to benefit a lot of the communities. We'll get back a lot to that during the Q&A. Next speaker that we have is Duncan Bass, cultural critic and SAM curator for media and technology. I think in his work, he does a lot of writing and curatorial project that explores the intersection between art and contemporary culture, emphasizing on societal implications of emerging technologies and the politics of visuality. Uh, Up to you, Duncan.
Thanks, Shengen. Thanks, Ernie, Eunice, and everyone at National Gallery for facilitating. And thanks, Loretta, for sort of setting the stage for where the metaverse development is headed. While most of the conversations about the metaverse sort of center on the future and developing the infrastructure of these kind of virtual environments or building within these virtual environments, my work as a curator and as an art historian whose special interest lies in digital art and computer generated spaces and sort of video games as a contemporary form of cultural production makes me more interested in the historical precedents of the trend. So I'm going to focus on how artists and art institutions have found ways to intervene into existing virtual spaces uh, in order to reach audiences who might be outside of traditional physical exhibition spaces, and how in doing this, the artists and the institutions that are exploring these spaces sort of complicate the underlying logic, both of brick and mortar museums, but also the gaming platforms that they're intervening in. This isn't going to be an exhaustive survey by any means. There's a huge art history here that people can look into, and I'd encourage them to do so. But I'm just going to share a few examples of this trend that hopefully will demonstrate the possibilities within this space. And just to clarify for this talk, I chose the term multiverse instead of metaverse, specifically to refer to the potentially, I guess, infinite number of virtual spaces rather than a single comprehensive virtual reality, primarily because this sort of interoperable metaverse doesn't yet exist. So for the time being, we're really looking at a series of multiverses. Furthermore, most of my examples here focus primarily on the first-person shooter game Counter-Strike, but I'd like to stress that within each of these multiverses or independent online spaces, each of them has their own aesthetics, their own modes of interaction, and their own social norms, and artistic engagement with those things is really what demonstrates the possibility. And finally, I guess just a piece of housekeeping. None of this is an indictment or an endorsement of any of the platforms. I actually really love the games that I'm talking about, but this is really a celebration of the creative capacity of artists, curators, and the institutions who are working within the structural limitations of these spaces that I find so interesting. Let's see. So I'll start with some early examples. The first is Velvet Strike, a mod for the first-person shooter game Counter-Strike. This was developed by Anne-Marie Schleiner, who some folks may know from her time at NUS here in Singapore, Joanne Leandre, and Brody Condon. The mod essentially adds protest sprays to the game's existing graffiti function. And Velvet Strike sprays sort of range from playfully out of step with the self-serious violence of Counter-Strike to spreading explicitly anti-war messages. And so in case anyone here isn't aware, Counter-Strike is a video game that was first developed in 1999 as a modification for the popular sci-fi shooter Half-Life. Essentially, Counter-Strike allows users to upload custom designed graffiti to spray throughout the game map. And rather than developing a standalone mod, the the Velvet Strike developers, used the existing function to upload this crowdsourced anti-war imagery. This is sort of, in their words, a virtual performance, and the artists and other players involved spread this imagery throughout the online servers without engaging in conflict, which is really the central motivation of Counter-Strike and other first-person shooters. So this is essentially a mod of an existing mod. So mod is short for modification. And it was developed just after 9/11, coming into existence alongside the US's declaration of the war on terror, which is really the central premise of Counter-Strike. This was an early intervention into the space where gaming and gaming culture and politics meet, which has become increasingly active in recent years. And really was at the forefront of artistic activist gestures within this virtual space. So I'll move on. I'm going to stay in Counter-Strike for the time being and talk about a pretty well-known Singaporean artist, Charles Lim Young, who was an early contributor to the Counter-Strike community starting in 1999 while the game was still in its alpha stage development. So at the time, Lim was on hiatus from art school in the UK and spent most of his time playing computer games. And like a lot of people at the time, got really invested into Counter-Strike when it was originally launched as a mod. So while the original Counter-Strike mod for Half-Life was made by a Vietnamese Canadian named Min Lee, who goes by Gooseman, during the early development, most of the labor was sort of outsourced to this large community of players of Half-Life who were able to contribute to the game by designing maps or avatar skins or weapons or any other game elements. So this was essentially crowdsourcing all of the maps or virtual environments where the action took place. So as an artist, Lim had experience creating these digital textures and started playing with level design, starting a project called Gamer Sutra. And the Gamer Sutra group started creating levels based on 1990 Singapore, including a Chinese temple and the Capitol Theater, amongst a few others. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find images of these maps, so the pictured HDD flat map is made by the game modder Yonk around the same time, I think 2002. Lim also noticed that the voices for players and non-playable characters in the game were all Western, so he supplemented his maps with sound packs of typical Singaporean voices and eventually created sound packs in Malay, Tamil, Hokkien, Cantonese, and Singlish. And I think for the most part, Counter-Strike players probably weren't aware that they were experiencing the work of a contemporary artist, but ultimately they were exposed to the representational critique that was inherent in Lim's work. So I think this is probably an overlooked piece of Singaporean media art history because of where it falls between the lines. And to Counter-Strike ultimately taught Lim, in his own words, quote, "The internet is not flat." And so I think geographic disparity that exists online is about more than audiovisual representation through apps or skins or audio packs, but also about infrastructure. And so in this fast-paced game environment, I think many gamers who might be joining us are well aware that geographical distance directly impacts response time. So this is a direct consequence of global internet infrastructure, which comes to inform a lot of Lim's later better known work with TsunamiNet. And ultimately for me, this underscores that access and representation in this context are two sides of the same coin. So this is a more recent project organized by the artist run space Cantina in Aarhus, Denmark. The exhibition DE Cantina is located in Counter-Strike Global Offensive, which is the most recent version of the franchise, which I'll refer to as CSGO, as most people do. At DE Cantina, the artist Aske Tiberg and Lena Finderup Jensen exhibited works that revolve around themes from the nostalgia associated with older computer games, the dichotomy between good and bad, and the agency of the gamer. So in this context, Cantina's concrete architecture and the surroundings were recreated as a playable 3D map in CSGO. And in this context, the server could be sought out by audience members through a direct link, but was also hosted on dedicated or also hosted on CSGO servers where dedicated players just looking for a game were also loaded into the map. And unlike Velvet Strike, DE Cantina functions as an exhibition space while also being played like any other CSGO map, where the conditions are ultimately dictated by the rules of the game. So in this context, Counter-Strike, the prefix DE before the name of the map indicates the game mode. So in this case, a bomb defusal scenario, and then the second part of the name is the location. So a bomb defusal cantina. So the exhibition is interesting because it's limited both by the graphics capabilities of CSGO and the chaotic contexts in which audiences encounter the exhibition, which I think makes it an interesting experiment in both audience engagement because it brings in players that have no interest or intention to be visiting an art exhibition, and by extension sees the museum as a literal battlefield, which is a knocking off a term coined by Hito Steyerl. Ultimately here, rather than challenging the players to engage with contemporary art on its own terms in the sort of sterile environment of the museum, the project challenges institutions to consider the role of public art in a world that's sort of saturated with creative content. So how can museums stay relevant in an era when CSGO exists. For my last example, I'm going to move away from Counter-Strike as much as it pains me. And I'm going to mention this 2021 project by the artist Cause at Serpentine Galleries. So this exhibition took place between Serpentine North Gallery in London's Kensington Gardens and the popular online platform Fortnite. The exhibition was called Cause New Fiction, and it, I think, really successfully blurs the lines between physical and virtual spaces. So first, a virtual copy of the exhibition featuring paintings and sculptures from the physical gallery were recreated in the video game's creative mode, Fortnite Creative, by a team from Beyond Creative and Alliance Studios. The second aspect is that elements that existed within the virtual exhibition, but were not physically present in the gallery space, were made visible using augmented reality through the collaboration with Acute Art, which is a free app that has a lot of AR content made by contemporary artists. And the final element, although the sort of virtual exhibition server exists independently of the Fortnite Battle Royale mode, this limited number of rare outfits designed by Cause were also created for players to use within the traditional game modes like Battle Royale, so that you could take elements out of the exhibition into the larger game world. And I think together, the virtual gallery, the physical exhibition, and the character outfits create this fluid and holistic artistic intervention into these online spaces that already exist and already have dedicated audiences, demonstrating potential for presenting or collecting artists' work in the metaverse in ways that are not tied to a specific domain. So this is my last example, but I'll give it back to Shengen to present any questions that he or the audience might have for me or Loretta.
Thank you. Wow, Counter-Strike. That brings back some memories, eh? Okay, so now we have reached to the Q&A section. I'll ask some questions and then Duncan and Loretta, I'll just target them at you one by one. So, start off with something very, very simple. Duncan, why in Metaverse and why in 3D? I mean, based on the presentations you have gave, all of them revolve around 3D spatial design and interactions, especially, of course, more contemporary video games. So why? Oh, I think Duncan is frozen right now. Can you hear me, Duncan? Maybe I'll just move on first, eh? Uh, Loretta, so about your presentation earlier, I think there's this element about humanizing that's extremely important. So why is it so important to build technology that's humanizing and at the same time, to make them meaningful?
I think first and foremost, I truly believe that technology should really serve humanity. I really think that's fundamentally what it should be, right? I think it should really make our lives easier, better, more accessible, and we should become kinder, more empathetic, more human. I mean, fundamentally, we are human, and I think that one of the things that we feel really strongly about is that I think as the world becomes so much more interconnected, and especially now that we're creating these like immersive spaces, right? If we talk about Web 1 being the age of like information, where it's kind of like cold and sterile, you're able to just get like information at your fingertips. And Web 2 being the space where it's all about interaction. Now, each and every single one of us can have our own platform. Andy Warhol once said, we're all like 15 minutes of fame. It's like now everyone has like 15 seconds of fame, right? Everyone's a TikTok star, some social media star. And this Web3 world is really about creating more immersion, more interoperability, and owning a little bit more of our own identity. And I think fundamentally what makes us human is our ability to identify, like who are we. I think this is like the perennial question, right? And so I think even as we create more and more immersive worlds, faster and faster technology, 5G, 6G, 10G, 12G, I think what fundamentally keeps us apart from any other thing is that sense of consciousness. I mean, even then, now we're already starting to think about like AI. There is an NFT project that we're tracking that's called altered state machine that allows you to even create a brain in your NFTs, right? We're already talking to companies that are like creating, AI music. You can just like put in a couple of prompts and it's able to generate music on its own. And I think all of this is fundamentally amazing, right? But I still think that what amazes me more is the conversations I have with people who come up with these ideas, right? I think the reason why I show up to work every single day is super excited. I mean, just being here with you, Shengen and Duncan, it's not just the stuff we create, right? I mean, that is a function of resource, capital, partnerships. But fundamentally, the fact that human beings can get together and like discuss these ideas and then organize, mobilize, fundraise, and get it to happen, I think that just blows my mind every single day. And every day when I have these conversations with folks, we're constantly pushing the technology. And I think a lot of it is a sense of like curiosity, like the child, a sense of like ego, a sense of ambition, a sense of like pushing boundaries. But I think that's what fundamentally makes us human. And I don't ever want to give that up. If we create this like super machine that can fundamentally then begin to do every single thing, then I think we're going to be kind of like out of a job, right? So I actually think that I don't want that to happen. And so I always think that technology should always fundamentally be serving humanity. It's a very simple way of me looking at the world, but I truly think that's what makes it joyous being human, right? I mean, I have 18 cats running around, and some days I really think like I wish I was my cat because it just eats, sleeps, rolls around, looks damn cute. But I enjoy being human because the one thing that we can do that the animals that we love can't is that we can mobilize, we can collaborate, we can build on each other's ideas, and that's what makes us human. And I think that's special. I don't ever want to lose that for 1 second. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally buy that. And, I think the core part about all this advancement in technologies and all, I think at the core of it is really about us being human, trying to find out like what's the next step. How do we come out of our own body into our own consciousness? And it's amazing. Okay, I think Duncan is back, so I'm gonna throw you two questions now. First question I asked earlier: why in Metaverse? Why in 3D? And then, in what ways can Metaverse offer to institutions, organizations, and individual for a space for growth? Like, how can the lines between artists, curators, educators, and gaming within Metaverse space be blurred?
I guess I'll start with the first question. Why the metaverse? Why 3D? And for me, it really comes down to the visual language that audiences, particularly younger audiences, are already familiar with and fluent in. So I think 3D virtual environments are maybe novel and intimidating at some points to older audiences, but a lot of younger users are used to spending time in these spaces. And I think that the sort of relative lack of critical projects that engage with the space indicates a disconnect between institutions and young audiences. And so I think that intervention into these spaces and really allowing the users to reflect on the spaces critically is a really important role for institutions to play in the metaverse. I guess the reason that I always push for this is because in a world that's so saturated, I guess, with interesting things to do and content online, why would you go to a contemporary art exhibition if it doesn't have anything meaningful to say about the cultural or aesthetic milieu that you, as a young person today, navigate in your daily life, right? And then I think your second question was sort of about blurring the space between art and institutions and different roles within the metaverse. And for me, I think that it's one of the spaces where it's already happening. So, like a lot of the best 3D artists that I work with or engage with don't like work within the field of contemporary art, right? They don't identify as artists with a capital A. They're developers or animators or um, people like Loretta who stumbled into the metaverse and started building and creating. And so I think that in a similar sense, the audiences for this sort of artistic output aren't traditional art audiences who are used to visiting museums as a regular event, but they're a group of people who have found online spaces enriching in some capacity, either as video games as a sort of complex narrative media, an evolution of film in a way, or as just a sort of after work escape into like Dota 2 or something, right? And I think ultimately they're really powerful aesthetic experiences, and institutions and arts organizations should be open to better understanding them and engaging with them in a meaningful way.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like back in the day, I had to tell my mom that computer games was something else. Look at who's laughing now, mom. Okay, Loretta, questions for you. How do you communicate the metaverse in a way so that society can start embracing the positive aspect that it can bring?
Mm. And actually, I'll link that to your comment on computer games. One of the reasons why I jumped into this space, right, was because as a creator, while I'm not a gamer, like seriously, like I am the complete antithesis to a gamer because I'm a live theater practitioner. I mean, like, there's nothing more live than than a theater practitioner, director, actor, thespian. But I think the part that really drew me to it conceptually was the fact that it allowed for us to, as artists, that sense of ownership is really important, right? The fact that, to your point, right? You say, "Hey, mom, look who's laughing now," right? Like back in the day, if you're a gamer, people say, "Don't be an artist." What art? Like, what are you studying? What is that theater? Huh? What you can't? Are you sure you'll be a theater? You should be artist. What be curator? Are you serious? And I think what really made me sit up and notice this was because I think that the technology has now taken us to a point where, hopefully, to your point, Shengen, we can have the last laugh, right? That creators and fundamentally the conceptual creative economy has been talked about for so long, but we have always been at the hands or the mercy of, Wall Street, the financial markets, financiers, producers, the money makers, right? And not to say that's not important. We know that's hugely important. But oftentimes our art and our artistry and our creativity, our concepts, our ideas, our blood, sweat, and dreams are often made secondary in service of these financial markets. So I think one of the reasons why the metaverse is so appealing to me, and to your point, how I want to get people to really lean in and think about it, is if you are now given the opportunity to potentially own your own data, to potentially own your own history, to potentially own your own identity, to play a part in this sort of space where we're always saying, oh, it's the fangs is dominating the world, it is the big corporations is dominating the world. I mean, I give you a really good analogy. Democracy is an ideal, right? We know that it's fundamentally an experiment. We know that democracy is fundamentally antagonistic because you have, out of so many different people, you want to have a similar ideal. But then out of that, like, similar ideals, you also want to respect differences. I mean, democracy in itself is fundamentally experimental, fundamentally idealistic, but it doesn't stop us from pursuing it because we know that it is still better from other modalities out there. Do I want to live under a dictator? Maybe not quite. Do I want to have the ability to make my own choices, choose my own adventure? That's why we all, love these like adventure books. That's why you're all gamers, right? Because you have that sense of agency. So now we're finally saying that we're at a time in history where you have the conflation of, the blockchain, the NFTs, the technology, the crypto, where it potentially allows you to depart from the status quo, depart from the reserve currency, fiat currency, depart from powers that be that have controlled, banking, financial markets, technology, and be potentially able to create on your own. I find that infinitely exciting, right, as an artist. Is it going to be a challenge before we reach true ownership, true digital democracy? Yes. But does that stop me from wanting to try? The artist in me says no. The human being in me says no, because otherwise, then it takes the fun out of creation, right? I think fundamentally the three of us here, because we are creators, right? I mean, we've drank the Kool-Aid. We're saying, okay, we're gonna f the money for a while. We just want to pursue our ideals, our dreams, and you know, uh, there's now something so exciting to be said that this economy actually allows us to not only pursue our dreams but pay your bills. I am so excited to be CEO of Smobler Studios because I'm finally giving jobs to creators. They're creating digital assets and getting paid. I mean, this was like unheard of 2 years ago. I mean, your mother would be like, please, don't play computer games, can. But now you're actually able to say, hey, mom, I'm actually getting paid to do this. Some say it's exploitative, but I'm like, okay, first off, you say that don't have a career in this because you don't get any money out of it, and then now that we finally are able to, turn the tables around, creative people are sick and tired of saying, I can't make a living from being an artist. We finally found a way, right, to fuse technology and our creativity, and then you're saying it's exploitative. Like, there's no winning. So I'm saying, lean in, jump in, right? Give yourself a chance, because if you don't, then all this evolution and all the hard work that predecessors have put in, right, to create more modalities of us to own our data, own our own creativity, would go to naught. So I'll say, jump in, lean in. The metaverse is what you make of it, and we need the best of us in it.
Wow, interesting. Okay, I think I want to try to link that a little bit about digital ownership. So maybe asking for Duncan. So what does it mean for true digital ownership? From NFT to digital identity.
Yeah, I guess while I agree with a lot of what Loretta's saying, I think I have to be the maybe cynic
Devil's
in the
advocate.
room that you expressed, that you mentioned earlier, because I am always a little bit wary of the sort of, I guess, when identity or agency or self-expression gets tied to a form of consumerism or ownership. And I don't think that digital ownership is really any expression or any exception of that expression, right? So, I mean, just speaking as a gamer, I think that there's nothing that's, I guess, less fun than in-game microtransactions or people being able to sort of pay to level up. And I think that you can equate that directly to the way that maybe money influences politics or something, right? So being able to sort of use fiat or digital currencies to get ahead in these spaces, whether those are dollars or Bitcoin, or whether they're an in-game token that exists within one of these video games online, right? And so I fully support artists in any form being compensated for their work, and I'm a huge advocate for that, because I understand the huge amount of time and infrastructure really that's required to maintain these spaces. It's really just this idea of tying agency or one's identity directly to a transaction that for me is always a skeptical space to enter into. And it's sort of the subject of a project that I'm working on that will launch at Singapore Art Museum next year, centering around artificial intelligence, what it means to be human, and the ways that identity are constructed through these sort of mediated spaces.
Oh, did Loretta just dropped out?
No, I hope it's not because of my answer.
Maybe she got triggered. No, I'm joking. But thank you so much. Well, looking forward to the Singapore Museum exhibition next year. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, we're planning right now.
Oh wow, fantastic. Um, well, I guess while we are waiting for Loretta to come back, I'll throw you another question. So I think this exhibition that you were talking about, it seems to be creating this sense of immersion, I would say. Um, One question for you: how can immersive experience help society or bring people in close contact with their environment and their surroundings?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I'm super interested in, and I think that in our conversations, Loretta and I have discussed embodiment a lot, and I think that we're still a long way from achieving that through VR and other technologies, but I know that it's on the horizon. So, with the sorts of haptic technologies and other things that are being developed, I have a friend who works a lot in synth and VR. I think we're getting closer to these fully immersive experiences. But for me, these sort of massive multiplayer online games are more of an opportunity to rehearse these sort of forms of social interaction or real world engagement in anticipation of when we achieve that sort of synthesis of getting closer to a full sense of embodiment within these mediated spaces.
Loretta, just now the question was, I was asking Duncan.
I
Maybe.
exited because it was too difficult, so I exited. Sorry, now yeah.
So how can immersive experience help society to bring people in close contact with their environment and their surroundings?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I couldn't hear what Duncan said, so I exited. So I'm sorry if I'm repeating what Duncan has said. I think one of the things that I think a lot about, because I work with underserved populations. I work a lot while I've had the privilege to teach and work with students from Carnegie Mellon to Dartmouth and Ivy League universities. I also work with the incarcerated. And I also serve, in developing countries where lots of folks really don't have access to kind of amenities we have, right? Like we're having like Wi-Fi issues, or we're saying like, oh, there's a lag here, there's a lag there, but in some of the communities, and large part of populations still don't have. Some of these basic access, right? So I think one of the things that I'm hoping that we're able to do, I think one of the questions that came in a little chat too, is how do we make it a little bit more accessible, given the fact that it's still expensive. I think a couple of things. I think one, hopefully, given time, just like with cell phones, right? That it just became cheaper over time. I remember when I was in JC, and like the cost of one telephone, it was like one big brick, it was like $4,000-$5,000. You had to be like, some tauke to be able to own like a Motorola, brick phone. And today, I mean, you could technically get a cell phone. Like my dad has his like $50 cell phone. He's used it for like 8 years. I think there is something to be said about function of time, about these technologies, just becoming cheaper over time. And so I also do hope that it's a function of time that some of these immersive experiences will get to a point where it is affordable for developing countries, right, to be able to bridge that gap. Because the fact is, I think these income inequities will still exist. And so while perhaps you may say it's naive and idealistic, but I think in order to be a creator, you do need to have some willful ignorance and idealism that I would like to be able to, bring some of my other underserved students to be able to experience what is it like to walk in Rome, right? What is it like to bask under the Greek auditoriums, right? How is it like to sort of bring yourself into like the Great Wall of China, right? Because there's so many of them that have never traveled, and I'll be really honest, right? Like today I teach, I taught a class out in Waianae Coast in Hawaii, which tends to serve a native Hawaiian population that tends to be more depressed. They tend to come from lower income levels. A lot of them really don't even travel beyond Hawaii, right? It's just really expensive. So if I'm able to, as a teacher, like bring that technology to school, allow them to perhaps even bring their avatars, allow them to, have a trip in Singapore, understand what it might be like, the culture, be able to interact with Duncan in the gallery, be able to interact with you, Shengen, and look at what you've created, right? In real time, in this perspective, and be able to walk about. Because the fact is, I won't be able to fly 50 of my students to Singapore. It'll be cost prohibitive. But I think that the next step to evolution of art and technology, using our title as it is, if we're able to do that, if we're able to provide more access and opportunity to students and populations typically don't have this, I think we would have succeeded. I think that would be a perfect example of how technology serves humanity, it makes us better and bridges those gaps. That would be something that I hope that we can all co-create together.
Okay. One last question. Okay, for both of you, having at that point of co-creation uh, and community, I think it's a very strong point. What the metaverse can really help um, engage with. So, in terms of collaboration and co-creation in the metaverse, what is your vision? And maybe if there's like an example you can refer to as something that is sort of like best in class for now. Um, Maybe starting with you, Duncan.
Yeah, well, I guess based on my talk, maybe you all realize I'm a little bit backwards looking. I think it comes with taking too many history courses. But for me, the vision, I guess, is really about engaging the platforms that are developed on their own terms to better understand what they mean to us as spaces of engagement or community building. I think like the last figures that I saw said something like a third of the world's population plays video games in some capacity, and that's far more than visit art museums. So while art museums are often framing themselves as a so-called third space, a space outside of the home or the workplace for social interaction, I think that the way that these spaces function has more potential to reach audiences in that way. I saw Arch General Kristen in the chat mentioning how beautiful Minecraft is, for example. And I think that what's so beautiful about something like Minecraft is both one, the way that you work within its limitations, so everyone becomes quickly aware of the aesthetic limitations of Minecraft, that it's not meant to be hyper realistic, and then the beauty is interpreted within that context, and it becomes a social space. Like the amount of time that I've spent with friends and strangers inside of a Minecraft server, really just creating something together, I think are as cheesy as it sounds, are like really fond memories. So I think that for me, like collaboration and just sharing space there really is a form of social interaction that's possible, even in the context of pandemic lockdown or other examples, which uh, as we, face more of these challenges in the coming decades, I think having these spaces where you can really have a shared experiences on the terms of the platform in which you're engaging, I think is super meaningful. So.
Okay. While we're waiting for Loretta to come back, maybe we can get some questions from the chat. I think one just popped up for Duncan. Are you seeing any museums doing anything interesting in the multiverse for now?
Yeah, I guess I tried to share a couple of examples. The project from Cantina in Aarhus in Denmark in Counter Strike was from 2021 while they were locked down for COVID. They developed it during 2020. And then the Serpentine Galleries project in Fortnite, I think was really interesting, the way that it kind of blends the physical and the digital. And for me, both those are successful because they come to the audience as opposed to asking the audience to come to them. So they, you know, Counter Strike and Fortnite have huge audiences already, and so it's really just giving someone a break from their normal interactions within those spaces, and giving them access to something else. I think there are a lot of good examples, but for the most part, I think institutions are kind of creating doubles of their spaces and making them accessible. And so I think that's it's great for as a form of accessibility. But for me, the more interesting examples are ones that engage with the platforms on their own terms and meet the audiences where they're at.
Mm. Okay, another question from the live chat. How do you think laws and regulations of different countries will affect the world of metaverses?
Disclaimer: this is not legal advice. Um, I think this is something that we run into in conversations around NFTs also, right? So it really comes
Mhm.
down to where
That's right.
the corporations that own these spaces are based, right? So the jurisdiction where a company is based is the jurisdiction. If you read the fine print inside of the terms of service, you'll see that a lot of these companies like a lot of big tech companies, are based in the US, but a lot of them also exist in these sort of regulatory havens like the Cayman Islands or spaces in Central America where they specifically incorporate the company there because it has very little legal oversight about what you can and cannot do. And so when we're talking about NFTs, that's always something that I encourage people to look into, whether it's the exchange or whether it's the company behind minting, Yuga Labs or something, the company behind minting a series of NFTs. Because at the end of the day, there's a corporate entity that exists, and that corporate entity is incorporated somewhere, right? So uh, I think that might change if we achieve a true form of decentralization. But for the time being, there's a national legal framework that's kind of housing each of these things. They're just nested shells like Russian dolls.
I think I could answer a little bit for that too. So, uh, I think it was just last month or 2 months ago. There's a like around the world, a lot of big tech companies actually sort of got together. I think you can Google this. It's called the Metaverse Standard Forum, where all the companies, like everyone's trying to get together to try to decide um, what will be the appropriate rules and regulations to be placed onto the metaverse, so that everyone can have a sense of security and safety towards the metaverse as well. Yeah. So, Loretta, you're back, eh? Question for
Yeah,
you from the
yeah.
live
I
chat.
exit when I exit when there's tough questions, and then
Yeah.
it's a good
Not
trick.
running away. A lot more for you. So, if Web 3.0 is about decentralization, have you seen or be interested in any ways for metaverses to interconnect? Or do you think you'll still end up being wall gardens?
We certainly hope not, right? And I know from a front row seat, I can tell you that a lot of us creators are really keen to create interoperability. Um, is it going to be some time before we achieve that? Yes, but we've already seen a small sort of significant little interoperability. So, like for example, we work very closely with Sandbox, right? So, for example, if you bought World of Women, right? And now you can have your World of Women, NFTs, be interoperable in the Sandbox metaverse. So I think while these may seem very small, but for those of you who are gamers and technologists, you know that any sort of incremental change is in itself some sort of movement towards interoperability. So we often like sort of sit up and celebrate that. And I'll also say that I think it really stems from all the founders as well, right? I think we all take our role quite. I mean, we all have a sense of humor. We're all like creative and fun, but we all take this role quite seriously in that we truly want to create um, a world that is a little bit more egalitarian, a little bit more democratic, and at least tries to not recreate the ills that we've been talking about, right? Like Google's or the Facebooks of the world with the Cambridge Analytica. I think most folks that are in this space, I mean, to be really honest, uh, you make so much more money going to work for Facebook today, right? Or Meta, right? Or going to work for Google, Amazon. But we're actually seeing lots of executives and predominantly leading the charge, lots of young people in their 20s and 30s actually choosing to rather start up their own little metaverse firm. And that in itself to me is not insignificant. That to me is actually saying that, hey, you're going to put away the potential of earning money in a walled garden, investing the best years of your life in something that is really unknown, untried, untested, but we're going to try and co-create together. I find that energy really exciting, and we're seeing lots and lots of young people and minorities, women, really heeding that call. And that to me is like a call to arms, and that in itself is exciting because I mean to go to your point about diversity, equity, inclusion, right? If we are not heeding this charge now, and if the opportunities are there, and this like little walled garden the walls have been sort of peeled down a little bit, right? People are really sort of leaning in and getting really excited. So I think that the day will come. I'm excited about it, and again, I can't exhort more people to sort of jump in and join in the fray.
Okay, I think this one question could be answered by both, but I think Duncan, you could answer this one. Do you think Metaverse can be used as a simulation model for planning disaster relief or various scenario? Example, World of Warcraft, virus epidemic, to Civilization 5 Rising Storm.
Yeah, I mean the World of Warcraft virus example is interesting because I think it went terribly, and maybe that example that sort of re-expressed itself with COVID-19 in most places who weren't as successful as Singapore in controlling the spread. So I think in that sense they do work that way, but only in the sense with something like World of Warcraft, what you're getting as an example of how people react to the situation, whereas something like the Civ 5 Rising Storm expansion, I think, has less potential in how because you can't get enough people in an environment to respond, right? I think like 12 players max or something, and so I think that the simulation isn't complex enough, right? But that also brings into question these other simulation models, right? Like that they're building around, you know, climate change and this sort of thing to simulate all aspects of sort of global nuance from weather to human movement and this type of thing. And I think the old joke is that if you create a perfect simulation of the complexity of the Earth, that it ends up to mirror climate change. It ends up becoming the largest single polluter or something because of how much power it would have to consume. So I think there's always sort of a balance between those things, but I think that there is a potential, and I've seen like read things recently about creating these simulations to potentially test out within this virtual space the implications of introducing uh, artificially made biodiversity. So, plants that are more adaptable to climate change, or introducing a new species to a habitat to prevent its extinction, and what potential consequences that would have on its environment. And so I think there's a lot of potential for those computer generated simulations. But I think as a sociological experiment, that World of Warcraft example is really interesting to me, something I've read a lot about.
That's right. Okay, I think I'll bundle these last questions together. So, sorry, Bodomino asked, as a software developer who majored in history, he would like to contribute to and chronicle the history of the future we are building. What steps can I take to do both at the same time? And also, this is also a general question, which also can be answered for that. How can young people contribute to the metaverse? I think this is like maybe entryway for the metaverse, and how could they start?
Hmm.
Yeah, Loretta, do you want to
I'll
start?
I'll I'll start, and then I'll leave the last word for Duncan, who probably has way smarter things to say. Uh, but like I always say, right? If I always have to bet a dollar, is bet on young people, because I think with young people, you always have the creativity, you have the fire in your belly, you have the willful ignorance, and you just have all that energy to say that I want to change the world. I remember one of the interviews I gave when I was like 18 years old, and I was like banging on tables like I want to change the world, right? and um I think one of the first few things that we can do is definitely to have you to lean in to explore the different metaverses there are. I think there are a lot of explorations, right? There's so many different metaverses out there now. Don't be afraid to sort of go in to from okay, like for me, we built a lot in the sandbox, right? We encourage lots of young people to go in there. There's no coding, right? You learn box edit. You can start creating with the game maker, right? You can already start being immersed in that environment. Otherwise, there are also different metaverses that you can go explore. And even if metaverses can be a little bit daunting right now, I mean, just really start exploring, just purchasing like your own NFT, setting up your own wallet. But you know, you folks don't have any issues with that at all, right? It's me, like old fogies, that have like problems even like understanding that. So I will say, really go in there, start creating. But I will urge all of you to really start thinking about. I think there was an earlier question that was when I was buzzed out, to really start thinking about the governance, the regulations. By that, I mean, how can we begin to create a better world? Because I really think that young people really think about the world in a very different way. You really think of you're so much more altruistic, you're so much more idealistic, and that's something that I hope doesn't leave me, and that's one of the reasons why I love working with young people. And so I think to constantly have these conversations on how might we make the metaverse better, right? I think that that's a conversation that most big corporations lose focus, right? And we begin to even sell an election for money. And not to get into a political conversation, but my point is, with young people, I urge all of you to always hang on to those ideals because I think they serve us. And I think always have those conversations on how might we make the world better, right? Because we have also seen, all of us know this, I don't want to go into a diatribe of the ills of just gross hyper capitalism. We know that capitalism is still, you know, the most functioning sort of economy, right? It allows us to be where we are, and we know that it is functioning. However, we've also seen that it is completely deplorable when we pursue it to its zenith, which is what's happening, right? So I truly think that I would like to have all of you young people to lead the charge by constantly asking about. Um, we've seen from the 70s with corporations really heeding Milton Friedman's call towards providing only shareholder value, right? And that has led us to like just really 40 years of just going down the truths of just constant shareholder value. Everyone's always thinking about the money. I urge all of you to really start thinking about creating stakeholder value, and then not have it be a rhetoric, right? But to really live up to that. All this talk that we have today of diversity, equity, inclusion, I'll tell you, the fact that it's finally on the table and we're actually talking about it makes me really excited. Because when I was in the 90s and I was a university student, when I was studying race studies and queer studies and feminist studies, like everyone sort of like laughed me, right? It's like, why are you studying that? You'll never, you know, be able to get it ahead. But today it's on everyone's lips. Why? Because you young people have led the charge. You have made sure that it's on every social media. You have voted with your wallet. You have spoken up. You have picket fenced. You have marched down the streets, right? You have Black Lives Matter. You have made sure that your voices are heard. And I think that with the metaverse, your voices are going to get even more magnified. So I really hope that you never stop asking the questions like, how might we make the world better, and how might we make the metaverse better?
Duncan?
Yeah, I would
Duncan.
second everything that Loretta said. That was full endorsement for everything Loretta said. And the only thing I would have to add to it is really, just to go back to the source of the question of how you can contribute to both to, I guess, the history of the future, which I guess sometimes sounds like a paradox, is really you just get involved in community in whatever form it looks like. So, I've always been a member of and a big proponent of like open source communities. So just sharing whatever information is out there and accessible, because you never know what amazing thing someone can do with a piece of code or an element that you don't know how to finish or you don't have an application for, right? And so whether that's the form of a more traditional open source community, whether it's a DAO, whether it's some form that has yet to be imagined or realized, I think that getting involved online or IRL is a big part of that. And I think communities are better at documenting things or maintaining things through dialogue and correspondence than someone who's sort of creating on their own, even if they are a hoarder and keep meticulous notes. So, you're simultaneously uh, making the future, but you're also creating a record that someone can come back to and recognize that it was history being made at the time.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, I'm so glad to hear both of you. I think to close this panel right now, I have one last question for the both of you. Uh, Share with us what are you reading about the metaverse right now. I think by sharing with us what you're reading or showing us the book that you're reading, it could also provide the viewers here something to look forward to. I could share with one right now. One of the books I'm reading is *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*. I think it provides a lot of ideas into what. Uh, I mean, it doesn't mention metaverse at all, but I think it provides a lot of new ideas into what the possibilities of metaverse can bring. Duncan?
And I can't participate in the chat, but I
Ah,
can add it, and maybe Ernie can share for me. So I just put it in our side chat. But I guess the most recent thing explicitly about the metaverse that I've read and was really interested in is a short PDF called Portals, which is a primer to the metaverse that was written by Leah Zaidi and Jesse Damiani. They're both sort of designers or artists, but Portals functions as a series of thought experiments about what might happen 50 years down the line within the metaverse. And I think they're all incredibly creative, whether they're positive or negative scenarios. And I think it does what science fiction does really well, in that it pushes you to imagine things that you wouldn't imagine otherwise, and that your brain runs with those things. So it's a short read. It's 30 pages or something, and free online. So yeah, I think it's a good thought-provoking uh, exercise.
right.
I was just about to
Loretta?
say 40 pages. Like most folks can only deal with 140 characters these days. So I'm always in between like three books, right? So I will say for anyone that wants a beginner crash course on the metaverse, navigating the metaverse is a good one to start because it kind of really breaks it down for you, and it's a really good introductory book to the metaverse. And for a more philosophical, artistic, historical, beautifully written book on the metaverse, I strongly recommend Matthew Ball's The Metaverse. Right? Ta-da! He's got to pay us, man. He's got to pay us. But I will always say if you could choose to be anyone in anything that you can be in the metaverse, I would say always choose to be a principled person. So I don't know if you can see, but I'm reading Ray Dalio's Principles because I think that in a world that you can choose to be anything and anyone that you can be, and you choose to don't be a jerk, right? Choose to be a good person, choose to be principled, choose to have values, and yeah, that's it. Those are my three reads. Slightly longer than 140 characters though.
Fantastic. Okay, I thank you both for your time and the presentation and the ideas that you shared in this session. Uh, right now, I'll hand it over to Ernie to close it up.
Hello everyone, it's Rini again. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm grateful for the time our speakers have taken off their busy schedules to share their stories, the working team for pulling everything together, and last but not least, you viewing the live stream right now for being a part of such an eventful evening. Looks like you have quite a reading list to go through if you want to continue to learn more about the metaverse. And I echo the speaker's sentiments that we hope that you will be able to play a role in shaping the future of the metaverse as well. So if a light bulb went off in your head sometime during the event, like Modo Nino was asking about what he or she can do, and you think that there is some innovative that you would like to bring to life to enhance the arts and culture sector, You can connect with us on Discord or LinkedIn so you can be the first to know when we make an open call for projects. While I will be keen to work with teams and individuals to build exciting ventures that will create value for the sector in areas concerning art experience, visitor experience, and also the way that we work and interact with visitors. So we look forward to building exciting ventures with you, and we will be inviting startups and innovative teams to work with us via the YLab Foundry program around early November. So do stay tuned if you want to build in this space. We welcome your feedback so we can learn from this and see how we can improve and look at what sort of programs you can push out. So please take a minute of your time to give your feedback to us. Your input is immensely valuable so we can continue to roll out innovative programs to benefit the community. All good things must come to an end, and I hope that you have enjoyed tonight's webinar as much as I have, and see you at our next event or in the Metaverse. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your night or day for that matter. Bye bye. Okay.
Didn't
You
catch
might.
the first sentence you said.
Oh,
I was I I didn't
now we're quite on time. You can leave this on then. Switch it off at 8:30, I guess.